My name is Madison Carter, and I will never forget the night I realized my own family wanted me gone. The rooftop terrace glowed with fairy lights, the orchestra playing softly as laughter mingled with the clink of champagne flutes. Guests congratulated me on graduating from Northwestern, with a biochemistry degree praising the future they assumed was already written for me. On the outside, it was the perfect celebration, a wealthy family honoring their daughter's achievement. But beneath the sparkle of chandeliers and the scent of roses, a darker truth was unfolding right in front of me. I stood near the fountain, my graduation gown still draped around my shoulders, as I noticed something odd. My father, CEO of a pharmaceutical empire worth billions, leaned casually against the bar. To anyone else, he looked like a gracious host, but to me, his daughter, the movement was unmistakable. His hand hovered over a crystal flute fingers, twitching, as he tipped a tiny packet of white powder into the champagne. The grains swirled briefly before vanishing into the golden bubbles. My blood ran cold. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light, maybe sugar, or something harmless. But then he glanced around with that sharp, calculating look I knew too well, the look he wore whenever he destroyed a competitor's career in a single boardroom meeting. He thought no one had seen, but I had. My chest tightened. My own father, the man guests praised for his philanthropy, was trying to poison me at my graduation party. I froze, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. 1,000 questions tore through me all at once. Why? What could justify this? Hadn't I done everything to avoid conflict, to carve my own path quietly? Was independence such a threat that he would rather erase me than let me live freely? As the orchestra swelled, I stared at the glass he had prepared. That flute was meant for me, the rebellious daughter who refused to become another cog in the family empire. Suddenly, every cold remark, every dismissive look, every whispered conversation clicked into place. My parents had never truly celebrated me. Tonight wasn't about honoring my success, it was about ending me before my life could truly begin. I forced myself to smile as a waiter passed by. My pulse hammered in my ears, but years of surviving my family's cruelty had taught me one thing: never show weakness in front of them. If I panicked, they would sense it. If I hesitated, I might not get another chance. So I did what I had learned to do best. I compartmentalized. I tucked the horror deep inside, locked my expression into neutrality, and watched. I needed proof. I needed to understand. Because if what I had just witnessed was real, then this was no longer just a toxic family dynamic, it was a life-or-death battle playing out under the Chicago skyline. And in that moment, staring at the poisoned champagne, I knew my graduation was no longer the beginning of a new chapter. It was a fight for survival against the very people who had raised me. I took a deep breath, straightened my gown, and prepared myself for what was coming next. This was no ordinary family drama. This was betrayal written in bubbles and gold-rimmed crystal, and I was the only one who knew the truth. I kept my smile fixed as laughter rippled through the crowd, but inside my mind was spiraling. The poison in that glass wasn't just a threat to my body, it was a symbol of everything my family had tried to control and silence. I had spent years fighting to live on my own terms, and here in the very moment that should have been my triumph, they were making their final move. Before I tell you how I confronted that betrayal, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments. And if stories like this pull you in, if you want to know how far family loyalty can twist into something darker, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because the story I'm about to share doesn't just end with a poisoned glass, it unravels into a fight that changed everything I thought I knew about love, survival, and freedom. I steadied my breath, forcing myself to focus on the room instead of the panic clawing at my chest. My mother glided between guests in her sequined gown, her lips curved in that perfect smile that belonged on magazine covers. She thrived in these spaces, spinning illusions of grace and devotion. No one here would believe she was complicit in an attempt on her daughter's life. Yet I could still hear her voice echoing in my head from years past. Family comes first, even when you don't agree. My father stood near the orchestra, now shaking hands with men in expensive suits, men who weren't here to celebrate me but to negotiate contracts behind the glitter of a graduation party. To them, I was background noise, a useful prop for family branding. They didn't see the daughter who had chosen a different path, the one who dared to chase environmental science instead of pharmaceutical profit margins. They only saw what my father told them to see: another Harris to display, then discard. And then there was Sophia, my older sister, the golden child, the mirror I had been forced to live beside. She was radiant as always with her Harvard credentials, and her perfect smile soaking up every ounce of our parents' pride. When she caught my gaze across the terrace, she gave me the faintest smile, one that almost looked apologetic. But maybe that was wishful thinking. Maybe she had already chosen her side long ago. I clutched the stem of an empty glass, just to keep my hands from trembling. Years of quiet defiance, of enduring their sharp remarks and backhanded compliments, had prepared me for emotional battles. But nothing had prepared me for this, the realization that my parents were willing to gamble with my life for money control and legacy. I thought about my grandmother, the only one who had ever seen me clearly. She had whispered to me once, "Madison, you have to promise me you'll never let them bury your light under their shadow." It was her inheritance that gave me a way out, the $12 million they had discovered too late. That trust fund was supposed to be my freedom, and now I understood why my father's smile had tightened when it was mentioned at the last family meeting. If I lived, I would finally be untouchable. If I didn't, everything reverted back to them. The orchestra's music swelled, and my father raised his glass in a mock display of paternal pride. My skin prickled with dread. Guests around me laughed, unaware that this wasn't a toast, it was a trap. But here's the thing: I wasn't the scared little girl they had molded anymore. I had learned how to compartmentalize, how to watch and wait. And that night, I realized survival wasn't about avoiding the poison. It was about exposing the ones who poured it. So I breathed deeply, locking my fear away for later, and I began to plan. What no one at that rooftop party realized was that the next few hours would turn the Harris legacy inside out. People looked at my family from the outside and saw perfection. We were the kind of polished dynasty that architectural magazines loved to feature: our mansion gleaming, our names whispered at charity galas, our wealth treated as proof of success. But that glittering image was nothing more than smoke and mirrors carefully constructed to hide the truth. My father, Richard Carter, wasn't just a businessman. He was a king in a white-collar empire. He built Carter Pharmaceuticals with ruthless precision, crushing competitors, burying scandals, and cultivating an image of benevolence that fooled everyone. Reporters called him a visionary, shareholders called him indispensable, and politicians called him generous. I called him cold. My mother, Evelyn, came from old money. She'd been raised on legacy, on the belief that appearances weren't just important, they were everything. She measured love in status updates, affection in picture-perfect portraits, and loyalty in obedience. She wasn't the kind of mother who kissed skinned knees or whispered bedtime stories. She was the kind of mother who straightened your posture before a photographer's flash and criticized your hair while smiling for the cameras. And then there was Sophia, my older sister by 3 years. If you looked up the word ideal in one of our glossy family brochures, you'd probably find her face there. Harvard Business School with honors, debate team captain, tennis champion, piano prodigy. Every accomplishment gilded in applause and displayed in glass cases around the house. At every dinner, when Sophia spoke, our parents leaned forward, drinking in her every word as though she were scripture. When I spoke, the room seemed to dim. My achievements, straight A's, a state science fair, victory research papers that earned praise from professors, were brushed aside with perfunctory nods. "That's what we expect from a Carter," my father would mutter without lifting his eyes from the newspaper. The only comment my mother made after I won the state fair: "Your hair looked messy in those photos." I grew up in the shadow of Sophia's trophies. While hers lined the walls of the living room, my certificates gathered dust in drawers. When she performed at piano recitals, they beamed in the front row. When I presented research at a symposium, they came only because it would have looked suspicious if they hadn't. I wasn't just overlooked, I was unwanted, a stubborn reminder that not every child could be molded into the family brand. From the earliest years, my parents had mapped out our futures like pieces on a chessboard. Sophia would inherit the business strategy, and I, with my aptitude for science, would run the research division. Together, we would carry the Carter name into the next century. But the plan had one flaw: me. I wasn't interested in spending my life propping up their empire. I wanted to ask different questions, explore different truths, Look at how pharmaceutical waste was poisoning the environment and communities. To them, that wasn't passion, it was rebellion. And rebellion was the one thing the Carter legacy couldn't tolerate. I remember one evening vividly, the four of us at the dining table, china, gleaming a meal cooked by staff, but presented as though my mother had spent hours over it. Sophia had just announced another award, something prestigious, though I can't even recall what anymore. The applause around the table was deafening. My turn came. I nervously mentioned that one of my science projects had been selected for regional competition. My father's response. He folded his newspaper, looked me squarely in the eye, and said, "Don't embarrass us." Those words burned into me. Not encouragement, not support. Just a command, do not stain the image. That was life inside the Carter household. One daughter exalted, the other erased. And yet, standing at my graduation party years later, that hierarchy was the very reason I understood what was happening. Of course, it made sense they'd rather erase me than allow me to live freely with independence they couldn't control. In their eyes, I wasn't just the lesser daughter, I was a liability. The champagne glass glistened in my father's hand that night, and suddenly it wasn't just about envy or favoritism anymore. It was about power. And in the Carter household, power had always mattered more than love. When people ask me what my childhood was like, I wish I could say it was filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and warmth. But the truth, my childhood was a carefully staged production, and I was the background extra in a play where Sophia always starred. From the moment I could read, expectations were carved into stone. Straight A's weren't celebrated, they were demanded. Anything less was shameful. When I brought home a perfect report card in 5th grade, my father barely looked up from his laptop. "That's what's required if you want to be a Carter," he muttered. No smile, no pat on the back, just an order disguised as acknowledgement. I can still picture the contrast the day Sophia won her first tennis trophy. My parents practically threw a parade in our living room. The trophy was polished, photographed, and placed in a prime spot in the glass display case. My mother even had a special dinner catered that night, as though Sophia had just won Olympic gold. When I tried to show them a ribbon I'd earned at a science fair the same week, my mother glanced at the picture and sighed. "Why didn't you brush your hair before the photo?" It didn't matter what I achieved. In their eyes, it was never good enough. My science projects, the experiments that lit a fire in my imagination, were dismissed as hobbies. My essays, praised by teachers for their depth, were waved off as soft skills. Even when I won the state science fair in 10th grade, it was Sophia who got the front page family newsletter because she had placed first in a debate competition. Everything about me was filtered through their obsession with image. If I scored well, it was expected. If I failed, it was ammunition. The Carter family brand couldn't risk a weak link, and I was treated like one anyway. What made it worse was that my future had already been planned before I was old enough to understand the word career. At family dinners, my father would casually remark, "One day Madison will run the research division, while Sophia oversees the business strategy." That's the legacy we're building. The way he said it, final, unshakable, made it clear it wasn't an option. It was law. I remember the night I finally pushed back. I was 16, sitting at the dinner table with my fork clutched tightly in my hand. My father had just outlined once again how I'd step seamlessly into Carter Pharmaceuticals after college. My chest burned. For weeks, I'd been reading about the environmental effects of pharmaceutical waste, the very byproducts our family's factories produced. I blurted out, "What if I don't want to work for Carter Pharmaceuticals? What if I want to study environmental science instead?" The silence was suffocating. My mother's fork clattered against her plate, my father's jaw locked. Sophia looked between us wide-eyed as though I'd just committed treason. Then my father's voice sliced through the air like a knife. "Don't be ridiculous. You'll do as you're told." My mother began to cry, though not out of concern for me. "Think of the family, Madison. Think of our duty, our name. We've built this legacy for generations. You can't just walk away." That was the night I realized love in our house came with conditions. Affection was currency given only in exchange for compliance. The more I resisted, the more they withdrew. Weeks of cold shoulders and slammed doors followed every act of defiance. But here's the thing about being constantly dismissed: it sharpens you. It teaches you to hold on to the fire inside because no one else will fan it for you. By the time I left for college, I had learned to stand tall in the silence, to keep pushing, even when the people closest to me tried to push me down. At my graduation party years later, when I saw my father slip poison into my glass, I wasn't shocked by his cruelty. I was only shocked at how far he was willing to take it. He had been trying to erase me since the beginning, first my voice, then my choices. This time he wanted to erase me completely. And that night, as the orchestra played and guests laughed, I realized something powerful. The years of being dismissed weren't wasted. They had prepared me for this moment. Because if my own family wanted me silent, I would have to fight louder than ever to survive. The first time I truly broke from the script my parents had written for me, it felt like setting fire to a house I had been forced to live in. I was 17, sitting cross-legged on my bed with brochures from environmental science programs spread out around me. Northwestern's pamphlet sat on top, its bold letters, promising courses in ecosystem restoration and industrial contamination. My heart raced just looking at it. For the first time, I saw a version of my life that was mine, not theirs. When I told my father I wanted to major in environmental science, he laughed. Not a soft chuckle, but the kind of laugh that cut through you like glass. Tree hugger nonsense, he scoffed, slamming the newspaper on the table. Do you have any idea what it means to be a Carter? Your future is not some activist fantasy. You'll study pharmaceutical sciences, you'll join the company, and that's final. My mother didn't laugh. She cried. She had perfected that roll tears as manipulation. Why would you do this to us, Madison? Don't you see your duty is to carry our name? Without you and Sophia, there is no legacy. She clutched her pearls as if my dream had personally insulted the ancestors, but I refused to back down. Something inside me had hardened over years of dismissal and invisibility. I looked at them both, my hands trembling, but my voice steady. I can make a difference in the world without becoming your puppet. I will not spend my life cleaning up messes your company makes, just so you can hide them again. That night, my father threatened to cut me off. He laid out tuition bills like weapons across the dining table, warning me that without their money, my education would vanish. My mother begged me to reconsider, warning that no one in society would respect a Carter who abandoned the family business. For weeks, I lived in silence. Meals passed without a word. My father's eyes never met mine. My mother's smile curdled into disdain. It was a punishment as old as my childhood isolation until I broke. But I didn't break. Instead, I applied to Northwestern, declaring environmental science as my major, with biochemistry as a minor, my one concession to their demands. The acceptance letter came on a rainy afternoon, and for the first time, I felt the weight of chains loosen around my chest. I had won a battle, though the war was far from over. College became my sanctuary. Surrounded by professors who valued curiosity over compliance, I finally tasted what freedom felt like. I threw myself into research on pharmaceutical waste, charting how runoff seeped into rivers, how communities sickened while corporations profited. Every discovery fueled me. Every late-night lab session felt like a step further from the prison of my parents' expectations. But they didn't let me go easily. Holidays became battlefields. At Christmas, my father slid job postings across the table as if they were gifts. This is the research position you'll take after graduation. It's already arranged. My mother chimed in with passive-aggressive smiles. One day you'll thank us for guiding you. I refused every offer. I even secured an internship with an environmental nonprofit one summer. When my father found out, his rage was volcanic. You think you can embarrass us? If you walk away from this family again, your tuition ends here. So I called his bluff. I took out student loans for my senior year. The look on his face, shock hardening into fury, was worth every sleepless night I spent calculating interest rates. For the first time, I had proved to him that his money no longer controlled me. Of course, what I didn't know then was that independence came with a price tag my parents weren't willing to pay. Behind their sudden silence, their shift from constant pressure to eerie calm, they were already planning their next move. And as I'd later learn, their idea of control wasn't just about shaping my future, it was about erasing it entirely. I'll never forget the day I learned about the inheritance. It was a quiet Sunday, and I had come home from college for the weekend. My grandmother's lawyer had requested a private meeting. I assumed it was routine paperwork, maybe something about her estate being finalized. What I didn't expect was for him to slide a folder across the mahogany table and say, "Madison, your grandmother left you $12 million. It's in a trust locked under your name." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. $12 million. My breath caught, my palms went clammy, and I stammered something incoherent. My grandmother had always been my safe harbor, the only one who saw me as more than a defective piece of the Carter dynasty. But I never imagined she'd trusted me enough to leave behind that kind of legacy. When my parents found out, the air in our house changed. My mother's face went pale, her lips pinched into a hard line. My father didn't say a word for a long time, just stared at me with that cold, calculating gaze I'd seen all my life. Finally, he muttered, "That money was meant to strengthen the Carter Empire, not fund your rebellion." Sophia didn't help matters. She stormed into my room that night, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. "Do you have any idea how unfair this is? You don't even want to be part of the family business, and she gives it to you. You're nothing but a fraud, Madison." Her jealousy was raw, unfiltered. She had always been the chosen one, the golden child. For the first time, she was in my shadow, and she hated it. From that moment, the inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a weapon. My father began plotting ways to wrest control of it. My mother wept dramatically about family unity, insisting I put the money into a joint account for everyone's benefit. And Sophia. She dropped venomous comments every chance she got. "You're not even capable of handling $12 million. You'll waste it on nonsense like your little tree hugger projects." But the more they schemed, the clearer my path became. That money wasn't their leverage. It was my freedom. I could finish school without their control. I could fund research that exposed the very damage our company caused. For the first time, their threats meant nothing. I used some of the trust to pay off my student loans, a decision that infuriated my father. "That's Carter money, not yours," he shouted across the dining room table, his fist pounding so hard the glasses shook. But the papers were signed. The money was legally mine. He couldn't touch it. That's when I began to see the cracks in their facade. Their love had never been unconditional, but now it was openly transactional. Without financial leverage, their dominance slipped. They had to find another way to silence me. At family gatherings, whispers grew louder. Distant relatives muttered about betrayal, about me abandoning the bloodline. My parents fueled those rumors, painting me as selfish, ungrateful, even unstable. It didn't matter that I'd spent years proving my worth academically. To them, the inheritance redefined me, a threat to the empire. And yet in the quiet moments, I found solace. I remembered my grandmother's voice, gentle but firm, telling me, "Madison, never let them decide who you are. You are stronger than they realize." I clung to that, because I could feel something shifting in my family, a darkness growing. One night I overheard them in the study. My father's voice was low, dangerous. "If she won't give us control willingly, we'll have to take it another way." My mother whispered something I couldn't make out, but I caught one word that chilled me to the bone. "Remove." I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. They weren't just angry, they were planning something. That was the night I realized this wasn't about family anymore. It was about survival. When the first real fight exploded, it wasn't over grades or college choices, it was over control. By then, the inheritance had shifted the power dynamic, and my father could feel it slipping away. What used to be passive-aggressive remarks turned into all-out war. It started one evening in the dining room under the sterile glow of our chandelier. My father laid a stack of documents on the table, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on me like I was a hostile witness. "Sign these, Madison. It transfers management of your trust to the family office. We'll handle everything. You'll still get an allowance." My stomach dropped. My mother sat beside him, tears already staged, clutching a tissue like a prop. "Please, sweetheart," she pleaded. "You don't understand what a burden money like this can be. Let your father and Sophia guide you." I scanned the papers. The language was clear. Once I signed, the inheritance would no longer be mine. My throat tightened, but my voice came out steady. "No. Grandma trusted me. Not you." That's when the mask slipped. My father slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. "You think you're smarter than me. You think you can run from this family. If you defy me, Madison, you'll regret it." Sophia jumped in, her voice dripping with venom. "You're pathetic. Without this family's name, you're nothing. No one will care about your stupid research once Dad makes a single call. The tension erupted into a shouting match. Years of resentment boiled over. I hurled back every memory they'd tried to bury, how they favored Sophia, how they mocked my dreams, how they used love as a leash. My words shook, but I didn't back down. That night ended with slammed doors and a chilling silence. But the fallout was only beginning. The next morning, my tuition payment from the family account was suddenly delayed. My car insurance, previously managed by my father's office, was abruptly canceled. They were cutting me off piece by piece, trying to choke me into submission. I adapted quickly. I dipped into my trust to cover expenses. Each payment I made on my own was like severing another chain they had wrapped around me. And though it terrified me, it also tasted like freedom. But the Carter house became unbearable. Every visit was a trap, every dinner a staged intervention. They whispered behind doors, stopped conversations when I entered a room, and exchanged glances that spoke of plans I wasn't meant to hear. I began to feel unsafe in my own home. One night, Sophia cornered me in the hallway. Her face was inches from mine, her eyes burning. "You don't get it, do you? Dad will do whatever it takes to protect the family. If you keep standing in the way, you won't just lose the money. You'll lose everything." Her words sent a chill through me. I laughed it off at the time, pretending her threats were empty, but deep down I knew she was telling the truth. My family wasn't just disappointed anymore, they were desperate. Still, I held my ground. I doubled down on my classes, poured myself into my internship, and leaned on the trust my grandmother left me. But in the back of my mind, a storm was gathering. I could feel it in the way my father's eyes lingered, in the way my mother's smiles grew thinner, in the way Sophia's anger turned to something darker. The inheritance hadn't just made me independent, it had made me dangerous in their eyes. And I began to realize when powerful people are cornered, they don't fight fair. I thought I was ready for whatever came next. But nothing could have prepared me for how far my family was willing to go. The breaking point came quietly in the form of a manila envelope slipped under my apartment door. I remember staring at it, my pulse pounding, wondering if it was just another bill. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside were copies of internal company emails, proof that Carter Industries had been falsifying environmental impact reports for years. The very research I had been mocked for pursuing suddenly connected directly to my family's empire. At first, I didn't know who had sent them. The envelope bore no name, just my address scrawled in block letters. But it was enough to light a fire in me. I had always suspected that Carter Industries wasn't as clean as they claimed, but here was evidence, tangible proof, that people were getting sick. Rivers poisoned, communities destroyed, while my family pocketed the profits. That night, I sat at my desk until dawn, cross-referencing reports, highlighting key lines, piecing together a story that could dismantle everything my father built. For the first time, I realized my inheritance wasn't just money, it was protection. Without that trust, I wouldn't have the independence to fight back. With it, I had a shield against their attempts to control me. Still, I knew one thing: I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to a trusted professor from my university, someone who had mentored me quietly over the years. When I showed him the documents, he leaned back in his chair and whispered, "Madison, this is explosive, but you need to be careful. Families like yours don't go down without a fight." Careful. That word clung to me. Every shadow outside my apartment felt heavier, every unexpected phone call made me jump. And yet I couldn't stop. I began documenting everything, every time my father threatened me, every backhanded comment from Sophia, every attempt to isolate me. I stored copies in encrypted drives, mailed duplicates to out-of-state friends. If anything happened to me, I wanted the truth to survive. My family sensed the shift. At dinners, their tones sharpened. My mother's pleas turned more desperate. "Madison, you're tearing us apart. Just put the past behind you. Be part of the family again." But I heard the edge in her voice. It wasn't love, it was fear. Fear that I had something they couldn't control. Sophia grew crueler by the day. One evening as I packed for a conference, she leaned against my doorway, arms crossed. "You think exposing us will make you some kind of hero? You'll just be a footnote, Madison. Dad will bury you the way he buries everything." Her words only fueled me. I was tired of being the family scapegoat, the disposable one. Now I had leverage of my own. But it wasn't just about revenge anymore. Late at night, reading the stories of people harmed by Carter Industries, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just my battle, it was theirs too. Families, displaced children, sick, entire communities silenced. My inheritance had tied me to a moral responsibility I couldn't ignore. That was when I made my decision I would go public. Not immediately, not recklessly, but strategically. I began reaching out to journalists, crafting careful emails that hinted at a bigger story. I set up anonymous accounts, feeding small pieces of evidence to watchdog groups. Each move I made felt like stepping onto a battlefield. I knew my father would retaliate, and he did. Suddenly, my apartment lease was under review. My bank reported suspicious attempts to access my accounts. My phone buzzed with unknown numbers at all hours. They were tightening the noose. But the difference now was this: I wasn't just reacting. I was building a case brick by brick, truth by truth. And with every document I saved, every story I uncovered, I felt less like a frightened daughter and more like a whistleblower preparing for war. I had crossed the line. There was no going back. And though I didn't know it then, my family had already begun laying a trap of their own. One designed not just to silence me, but to destroy me completely. I should have known the invitation was bait. A crisp white envelope arrived in my mailbox, sealed with my father's wax crest like some relic from another century. Inside, a single card read, "Family dinner. Sunday. No excuses." For a moment I considered tearing it up, but curiosity gnawed at me. What did they want now? After weeks of veiled threats and silent wars against my better judgment, I went. The Carter estate was lit up like a stage that night. My father sat at the head of the table, an empty chair conspicuously waiting for me. My mother's eyes flickered with rehearsed sadness, and Sophia wore a smirk sharp enough to cut glass. Dinner began in silence until my father finally leaned forward, steepling his hands. "Madison," he said evenly, "this family can forgive your rebellion, but only if you prove your loyalty. Sign the documents and this all ends." I felt every eye on me. My pulse pounded. "No," I said simply. That's when the mask came off. Sophia slid a folder across the table. Photos spilled out, me walking to class, meeting with my professor, even entering a journalist's office. My stomach lurched. They had been following me, watching me. My father's voice was a blade. "You think you can play games with us? We know what you're doing. The emails, the contacts. You're meddling in things you don't understand. If you keep pushing Madison, you'll end up destroying yourself, not us." The walls felt like they were closing in. My mother reached for my hand, but her grip was icy. "Please, sweetheart. Don't make us choose between protecting you and protecting the family." That was the moment I understood they weren't bluffing anymore. They were ready to ruin me, to smear me, to erase me if it meant keeping their empire intact. I left without dessert, their glares burning into my back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my apartment felt like footsteps. Every buzz of my phone like a warning. I was trapped between fear and fury, torn between protecting myself and exposing the truth. And yet I felt something new that night: clarity. Their surveillance, their threats, their desperation. It all confirmed that the documents I held weren't just incriminating. They were lethal to Carter Industries. My family was terrified, and that meant I was closer to victory than I realized. Still, I had to be smart. One reckless move and they would bury me under lawsuits, smear campaigns, maybe worse. The world needed to hear the truth, but I needed allies, people who wouldn't fold under the Carter name. So I doubled down. I moved my files to encrypted servers, kept hard copies in safe deposit boxes across the city. I even recorded myself on video, laying out everything I knew with instructions to release it if anything happened to me. And then I waited. Waited for the perfect moment to strike, for the leverage to turn their power against them. But I'll tell you this much: the deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was bigger than one family feud. It was a war for truth. And wars always come with casualties. Now, if you've been following my story this far, I need you to think about this. What would you have done? Would you have signed away your freedom to keep the peace? Or stood your ground, knowing it could cost you everything? Tell me in the comments. I want to know where you stand. And if you're new here, subscribe. This journey is only getting darker, and you don't want to miss what comes next. Because here's the thing: the Carter family wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. Their trap was only the beginning. And the next move they made, it almost broke me. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that dinner. My body was in survival mode, adrenaline rushing, mind spinning, every sound outside my window setting off alarms in my chest. But somewhere in that fog of fear, a new idea crystallized. If they wanted to trap me, I'd flip the trap back on them. It started small. I drafted an anonymous blog post, not revealing myself, but detailing parts of the environmental cover-up with evidence too specific to ignore. I uploaded photos of polluted rivers' testimonies from workers' snippets of the falsified reports. I let it simmer online, watched as whispers began to spread across niche activist forums. Then I moved bolder. I scheduled a quiet meeting with a mid-level journalist, someone hungry for a breakthrough but not yet under my family's thumb. We sat in the back corner of a rundown diner, my hands shaking as I slid the USB across the table. "Don't publish yet," I warned. "But hold on to this. If something happens to me, you'll know why." The journalist's eyes widened as he scanned the first file. "If this is real, Madison, this could topple everything." That was the point. For once, the Carter Empire was no longer untouchable, and I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was forcing them to guess what I would do next. Of course, the retaliation came fast. Anonymous numbers flooded my phone with threats. My bank accounts froze without explanation. A shadowy SUV sat parked across the street from my apartment for 3 nights straight. My father wanted me cornered, gasping, begging him for mercy. But here's what he didn't count on. I had already made peace with losing the family name. That inheritance trust wasn't a leash, it was my sword. They couldn't disown me into poverty. They couldn't starve me into silence. For once in my life, the money meant freedom, not chains. One night, staring at the ceiling, I thought about all the kids growing up in towns poisoned by Carter Industries. Kids who didn't have trust funds or safety nets. Kids whose only inheritance was illness. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just revenge. This was responsibility. So I shifted tactics. Instead of hiding, I started showing up. I attended community meetings under my own name. I spoke to lawyers not as the ashamed daughter of Carter Industries, but as someone ready to take them on. Every appearance was a calculated message. I'm not afraid anymore. My family noticed. My mother called in tears, begging me to stop embarrassing them. Sophia sent a text dripping with venom. "Enjoy your little rebellion. It won't last." And my father, he went silent. Which was worse. Silence from him meant calculation. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the quiet shadow in Sophia's spotlight. I wasn't the girl mocked for her research. I was someone who had stepped into the line of fire willingly. And though the fear never fully left, it was fused with something stronger: purpose. That purpose carried me through the backlash, through the loneliness, through the constant paranoia of being followed. It whispered to me in the dark, "Keep going. They're afraid because you're winning." And maybe, just maybe, you're feeling that same pulse right now, the tension of a fight that's no longer just family drama, but something bigger, something that speaks to the way power silences truth everywhere. If you're watching this, stick with me, because the next chapter isn't just about me. It's about what happens when a family empire finally cracks. Because I wasn't done, and neither were they. The storm hit faster than I imagined. It began with a headline on a glossy business magazine: "Heiress Gone Rogue Carter, Daughter Spreads Lies." My face, framed by a grainy photo clearly taken without consent, was plastered under the words. The article painted me as unstable, desperate for attention, even accused me of forging documents to punish my family. I knew immediately who was behind it. My father had flipped the switch, and when he did, the Carter machine moved like a predator. By the end of the week, 3 more outlets repeated the same narrative. Reporters camped outside my apartment. Classmates avoided me, whispering as I walked by. Even my landlord hinted that maybe it's safer if you moved out. The hardest blow came when I opened my email. My professor, the one who'd encouraged me to publish my research, sent a curt message: "Madison, in light of recent developments, I think it's best if we suspend your thesis work until the dust settles." Translation: he'd been warned. It was textbook Carter strategy: isolate, discredit, erase. I'll admit it, one night I broke down. I sat on my bathroom floor phone, buzzing with hateful messages, wondering if they were right. Was I destroying myself for nothing? Would anyone believe me if the only voice I had was drowned in a sea of Carter-funded lies? But then I remembered that diner, that journalist with hungry eyes, the USB now out of my hands, and I realized the truth was already seeded. They could smear me, but they couldn't unwrite the facts. That clarity sparked defiance. Instead of retreating, I leaned in. I filmed a video, just me and my camera, raw and unedited. "This is Madison Carter," I began, voice trembling, but steadying with each word. "My family wants you to believe I'm a liar. But here's what they won't tell you. Carter Industries has poisoned communities, silenced whistleblowers, and falsified reports for decades. I know because I've seen the files. And if anything happens to me, others have them too." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I spoke the way truth sounds: calm, unshakable, undeniable. When I uploaded it, I expected silence. But within hours, the views climbed. Comments poured in. Some mocked me, yes, but others said, "We believe you." That was the crack in their armor. For the first time, it wasn't me versus my family. It was me with an audience, witnesses they couldn't fully control. Of course, my father didn't sit idle. A lawsuit landed on my doorstep within days: defamation, breach of confidentiality, gross misconduct. The sum they demanded was absurd, designed to crush me into submission. But here's the irony: that lawsuit only made people more curious. Why sue if I was just a delusional girl? Why fight so hard to silence me if I had nothing real? Suddenly, my story wasn't just buried in whispers. It was trending. Activist groups shared my video. Former employees reached out with their own accounts. What began as a family feud was snowballing into a public reckoning. And through it all, my father's silence remained the loudest threat. I knew he wasn't finished. The Carters never fought one battle when they could wage a war. But I wasn't the same girl they raised to obey. I had stepped into the fire, and now I was determined to burn through their lies. So I ask you, watching this, when the world tries to erase you, do you vanish? Or do you carve your truth into stone? Drop your answer below. I want to know how you fight back when everything's against you. Because believe me, this was only the beginning. The Carter Empire was about to throw its most vicious blow yet. And when it landed, it nearly tore me apart. The morning it happened, I woke up to the sound of fists pounding my apartment door. Not the gentle knock of a delivery, not even the heavy thud of police. This was something else, aggressive, threatening, meant to rattle me awake with fear. When I opened it, 2 men in tailored suits pushed an envelope into my hands and walked away without a word. No expression, no acknowledgement. Just shadows sent by my father. Inside was a thick stack of papers, an injunction demanding I remove my video, retract my statements, and issue a public apology within 72 hours, or face irreparable consequences. I laughed, a bitter, shaky laugh that tasted like adrenaline. Because this wasn't law. This was intimidation dressed in legal language. And it wasn't just about silencing me, it was about breaking me before I could gain more traction. But here's the twist. While they were tightening the noose, I was already widening the battlefield. That journalist I'd given the USB to, he called the night before. "Madison," he whispered, voice electric, "we've verified parts of your files. If you're ready, we're going to run it." It was the kind of lifeline you dream of, but also a risk that could tip me over the edge. Because if my family suspected the press had their secrets, they'd launch a counterstrike like nothing I'd seen before. And they did. Within hours of that call, photos of me leaving a community meeting surfaced online, manipulated to make me look unstable. One tabloid ran with the headline, "Carter-era spiral substance abuse rumors surface." Another suggested I'd fabricated trauma for sympathy. The lies spread faster than I could breathe. I could feel the net tightening. Friends stopped answering my calls. Employers who once courted me now sent polite rejections. Even the barista at my corner coffee shop gave me a pitying look, as if to say, "You won't last long." I'll be honest, this was the moment I almost broke. I sat in my darkened living room, phone glowing with an endless scroll of hate. For the first time, I questioned whether fighting was worth it. Would exposing Carter Industries actually change anything, or was I just feeding myself to a machine too big to dent? But then another message blinked on my screen. It was from a stranger, a mother in Ohio. "My son worked at one of your father's plants. He got sick. We thought no one would ever speak for us. Don't stop." That message pierced the fog. It reminded me that this wasn't just about me or my inheritance. It was about every silenced voice, every poisoned child, every family robbed of justice while men like my father toasted champagne in their penthouses. So I steadied myself. I didn't take down the video. I didn't apologize. I went live again this time saying, if they can smear me this hard, imagine what they've done to others who don't have a platform. Imagine the stories that never saw the light. If you believe truth matters, stay with me, because the real evidence is coming. And here's where I'll let you in on something I wasn't bluffing. The journalist's story was already being finalized. In a matter of days, the Carter Empire would face something it couldn't buy, bully, or bury. But survival is never that simple. Before the truth went public, my family launched their most brutal attack yet. And it came not through the press or the courts, but from someone I never expected. Stay with me, because what happened next almost destroyed me from the inside out. Betrayal doesn't always roar in like thunder. Sometimes it seeps in quietly through the cracks you thought were safe. For me, it came from the last place I expected, my brother Daniel. Daniel had always been different from the rest of the family. He was the quiet one, the one who slipped me snacks under the dinner table when our father's rules felt suffocating. I believed with every fiber of my being that he understood me, that even if he never said it out loud, he disapproved of the empire our parents had built. So when the smear campaign reached its peak, I clung to him. He answered my late-night calls, reassured me when the tabloids got vicious, told me to hold on just a little longer. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't entirely alone. But loyalty is a dangerous assumption when you're up against the Carters. The first crack showed during a TV interview. A journalist pressed me about my family, and I said not everyone in my bloodline is guilty. Some of us see the rot for what it is. It was my veiled attempt at shielding Daniel, a way of signaling to the world he's not like them. 2 days later, I saw him on camera, standing beside our father. He wore the same tailored suit, the same cold Carter smile. And when a reporter asked if he supported me, his response cut deeper than any smear article. My sister has always been troubled. We love her, but she's clearly confused. I stand with my family. Those words shattered me. I remember watching the clip over and over each time, hoping I misheard. But there it was, betrayal served in polished sound bites broadcast to millions. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt hollow, like my lungs had collapsed. Daniel wasn't just abandoning me, he was validating their lies. His betrayal gave weight to their story. And worse, it told the world that if even my brother thought I was unstable, maybe I really was. That night I confronted him. I called, demanded an explanation. He answered, his voice, calm, almost rehearsed. Madison, you don't understand. Dad gave me no choice. Either I side with him or I lose everything. I'm sorry. Sorry, the word rattled inside me. What was he sorry for? For selling me out. For proving that in this family, survival meant silence. It would have been easier if he'd screamed at me, cut me off entirely. But his soft apology was worse. It told me he knew he'd betrayed me and he chose it anyway. And here's where the twist sharpens. The very next day, confidential files I had hidden in my apartment were leaked online, but not in full, not the way they were meant to be. Key details were redacted, data skewed to make it look like I had falsified evidence. Whoever leaked them knew exactly where I'd kept the copies. Daniel had been the only one who visited in weeks. That betrayal nearly destroyed me, not because it put my case in jeopardy, but because it struck at the heart of my fight. The one person I trusted had become the knife in my back. I'll admit it, this is when I thought of giving up. If blood couldn't stand by me, who could? If even Daniel saw me as collateral, maybe I wasn't strong enough to carry this fight alone. But then I remembered something: truth doesn't need unanimous belief. It only needs persistence. The journalist still had the untouched USB, and no amount of sabotage could erase the real evidence waiting to be exposed. So I swallowed my grief and turned it into fuel. Daniel's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It was the confirmation I needed. The Carters would sacrifice anyone to protect their empire, even their own children. And if that was the game they wanted to play, I was done being a pawn. Before the world saw the truth, I would make sure they saw the family's mask shatter first. Revenge wasn't what I wanted, not really. What I wanted was truth, but by now truth and revenge had become the same thing. The night after Daniel's betrayal, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at the glowing cursor on my laptop screen, replaying every betrayal, every smear headline, every silence from people I once trusted. I thought about my brother's hollow apology, about the families poisoned by Carter Industries' greed, about the mother in Ohio who begged me not to stop. And in that storm of memories, I made a decision. If they wanted war, then war is what they'd get. The journalist and I had been careful, but now we accelerated everything. We cross-checked files, built timelines, collected testimonies from whistleblowers who had been too afraid to speak. One man broke down crying during his interview, confessing how his daughter's medical bills bankrupted their family after she was exposed to toxic waste near a Carter plant. Another revealed how safety inspectors were bribed to ignore violations that could have saved lives. We packaged it all into a bomb of undeniable evidence. Not just data, but voices, faces, stories. Proof that could pierce through even the slickest smear campaign. The release date was set Monday 9 a.m. But when the story went live, nothing prepared me for the scale of what followed. Every major outlet picked it up within hours. Headlines screamed Carter Empire built on lies and poison. Protesters gathered outside company headquarters holding signs with names of loved ones lost. Stock prices plummeted. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes as news cameras swarmed his limo. The empire had cracked. But cracks don't mean collapse, not yet. My father moved fast. His lawyers filed defamation suits against every journalist involved. A PR team flooded the internet with glossy videos of happy employees. Daniel gave another interview calling me a disgrace who exploited family pain for attention. The smear machine didn't stop, it just shifted gears. And the cost was brutal. I lost my job permanently. Old friends cut ties completely, not wanting to be linked to a scandal that was now international news. Strangers followed me down the street, some cheering, some spitting. My apartment was vandalized one night. Liar sprayed across the door in red paint. The hardest blow came when the journalist, my ally, was suspended by his network under corporate pressure. For days, I wondered if I'd dragged him into a battle too dangerous to survive. But here's the thing about truth. Once it's out, you can't shove it back into the shadows. The story kept spreading. Independent media picked it up, activists amplified it, and suddenly I wasn't the only voice anymore. I was one of many. And yet the victory tasted bitter. Because deep down, I knew what was coming next. The Carters would never stop at lawsuits and lies. They'd go for the jugular. And this time, they would come for me in ways far beyond the public eye. Still standing on the balcony of my battered apartment, watching strangers march below with signs demanding justice, I felt something I hadn't in months: vindication. For once, it wasn't just me screaming into the void. I whispered to myself, they can't bury this anymore. The mask is cracking. But I also knew something else cracked empires fight hardest before they fall. And when the next blow landed, it would test not only my resolve, but my very survival. Because in the battle for truth, the final strike is always the most dangerous. The day of reckoning didn't arrive with a bang. It crept in disguised as silence. For weeks after the expose, the Carters fought tooth and nail to keep their empire standing. Courtrooms became battlegrounds, and the air itself felt thick with tension, but empires don't crumble all at once, they unravel thread by thread. The final thread snapped on a rainy Thursday morning. I was subpoenaed to testify in federal court. My father sat only a few feet away, flanked by lawyers in $1,000 suits, his silver hair slicked back, his expression carved from stone. Daniel sat behind him, avoiding my gaze, jaw tight, as if he knew what was about to come. The judge asked me to swear an oath. My hand trembled, but my voice was steady. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then I began. I told the story of my family, not as a daughter, but as a witness. I laid bare the buried contracts, the poisoned rivers, the bribed officials. I described the faces of victims I'd met, the funerals I'd attended, the hollow apologies from executives who never cared. The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of pens and the occasional cough. Every word felt like pulling glass from my throat, but I kept speaking. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about freedom. My freedom from the chains of a family name that had always suffocated me. At one point, my father leaned forward, his voice cold. Do you really want to destroy your own bloodline, Madison? I looked him straight in the eye and said, you destroyed it yourself the day you chose greed over humanity. That moment shifted everything. Gasps rippled through the room. For the first time, I saw something break in his mask, a flicker of doubt, of fear. By the time I stepped down from the witness stand, I knew the tide had turned. The jury deliberated for days. When the verdict finally came, it was like hearing the crack of thunder after a long drought, guilty on multiple counts: fraud, environmental crimes, bribery. The Carter Empire wasn't just fractured, it was finished. My father was led away in handcuffs. Daniel disappeared from public view, his silence now louder than any words he'd spoken against me. And me, I walked out of that courthouse into the sunlight free for the first time in my life. But victory has its scars. I had no job, no family, no safety net. My name would always carry the weight of a scandal. Yet standing there, I realized something important. Freedom isn't about comfort. It's about choice. And for once, I had chosen my own path, not one dictated by blood or fear. That night, I uploaded a final video message. I didn't rant, didn't cry. I simply spoke from the heart. If you're listening, remember this truth will cost you. It may cost you friends, family, even the life you thought you wanted. But silence costs more. I chose to speak, and though I lost nearly everything, I gained the only thing that matters, myself. Don't let anyone own your voice. Not your family, not your boss, not anyone. Because freedom isn't given, it's taken. And then almost as an afterthought, I added, if this story meant something to you, stay with me. Share it, subscribe, leave your thoughts. Let's make sure no one ever forgets that even one voice can bring down an empire. The screen went black. The story was over, but my life, the real life, the free life, was only beginning. When the dust finally settled, life slowed down in ways I hadn't imagined. The chaos, the courtroom battles, the endless smear campaigns, all of it faded into background noise. What remained was silence. And in that silence, I discovered something I had been missing all along: peace. I moved out of the city and rented a small place near the coast. Mornings became simpler: coffee on the porch, the sound of waves crashing in the distance, the smell of salt in the air. For the first time, I wasn't waking up to crisis emails or urgent phone calls. I was waking up to my own rhythm. Sometimes people would recognize me in the grocery store. Some offered words of support, others just stared. I learned to smile politely, to accept that my story no longer belonged only to me. It belonged to everyone who had watched it unfold. And maybe that was the point. My fight was personal, yes, but it had sparked something larger, a reminder that truth still mattered, that one voice could make a difference. The scars didn't vanish. There are nights I still dream of my father's cold stare, of Daniel's betrayal, of headlines screaming my name. But when I wake, I remind myself that scars are proof of survival. They are not chains, but reminders of the battles I've already won. So I plant flowers in my garden, I write in my journal, I record stories not of revenge, but of resilience. And I whisper to myself the same truth I want anyone listening to remember: freedom is not the absence of struggle, it is the courage to walk your path despite it. And with that, I close this chapter, grateful, scarred, but unbroken.